All right, so now let's talk about different events that we have. So disjoint events, also known as mutually exclusive events, are disjoint if they cannot happen at the same time. So if I go to a pet store and I buy a pet, one pet, I cannot buy a pet that is a cat and a fish at the same time. That does not exist in the real world. You cannot be a cat and a fish at the same time. So those events are disjoint or mutually exclusive. So if I look at these circles here that I've drawn, I have my sample space. Let's continue with this pet example. So my sample space would be all the pets that are possible. A would be I get a cat. B would be I get a fish. If I'm only buying one pet or adopting one pet, I cannot get both. So then the probability of A or B occurring, if they are disjoint in this manner, is equal to, so the probability of two events, A or B, is found by taking the probability of A plus the probability of B. So if I want to know what is the probability that I adopt a cat or a fish, I would need to know the probability that I want to adopt a cat and add it to the probability of me adopting a fish. Now I will just say, for me personally, the probability of me adopting a fish is 0. But that's just me. For other people, it's not 0. Other people enjoy pet fish. I'm just not one of them. All my pet fish died in like 3 days when I was a child. I saw no point to it. So let's look at an example that does not involve fish. So suppose in a library, 23% of the books are children's books, 42% of the books are adult fiction books, and the rest are nonfiction. So you cannot be a children's book and an adult fiction book at the same time. You're either a child's book or you're an adult book. You also cannot be a fiction and nonfiction at the same time. Okay, we're also going to assume that these children's books are all fiction. So the nonfiction books are just totally separate. So if we randomly select one book from the library, what is the probability that that book is a nonfiction book? So the probability that we choose a nonfiction book, well, it told us right here the rest of the books are nonfiction, but they didn't tell us how many or what percent that is. However, I do know that 23% are children's books and 42% are adult fiction. So I'm going to use the complement rule. 1 minus 23% is 0.23 plus 42% is 0.42. So I look at how much of the books have I accounted for so far. So I've accounted for 65% of the books. So the remaining is the percent that are nonfiction. So the probability that we select a nonfiction book is 0.35. So now find the probability of selecting a children's book or an adult fiction book. So we're looking for a children's book or an adult fiction book. So we're looking for probability of children's or adult fiction. So now I cannot pick a book off the shelf that is both of those. Okay, if I pick a book up off the shelf and look at it, it's either going to be a child's book or it's going to be an adult fiction book. It can't fall in both of those categories. So these are disjoint events. So the probability that I select a children's book is 0.23 because 23% of the books are children's books. Plus the probability that I select an adult fiction book is 0.42. So together, the probability of selecting one or the other is 0.65. And finally, what is the probability of randomly selecting an adult fiction book or a nonfiction book? So, probability of adult fiction, or notice these two problems have both said or. Also up at the top where we introduced this, or was bolded. That's a key word to help you figure out the problem. So now we're looking at fiction, and this is adult fiction, or nonfiction. So again, a book cannot be fiction and nonfiction at the same time. Either it's a made-up story, or it's a story about something that really happened, or it's, a biography or an encyclopedia type book or something like that. So the probability that I select a fiction book, an adult fiction book, is 0.42. Plus the probability that I select nonfiction, we found back in the first part, that was 0.35. So together, the probability that I select adult fiction or nonfiction is equal to 0.77, or 77%. If I go into the library and I close my eyes and I just randomly grab a book off the shelf, there is a 77% chance, or 77% probability, that the book in my hand will be either adult fiction or nonfiction, and not a child's book. So those are disjoint events and how to find the probability of A or B occurring if those events are in fact disjoint.